So what is Calvinism?
Okay, so before I dive into like just the specifics of Calvinism or Reformed theology, as it's also called, so we're going to hit on a few different topics, right? And so they're coming at it from the idea of, all right, so basically what we're going to be looking at is just what does these specific theological camps have to say about salvation?
So we're not talking about these camps in totality.
Correct.
We're talking about these camps as it pertains to getting saved.
Correct.
And their different views on it.
Correct.
Okay.
And so like if you're a theology person, like, so we're putting this in the camp of like looking at Reformed theology and Arminianism and some others through the lens of what is their soteriology. Okay. In other words, what is their theology on salvation?
That's called soteriology?
Soteriology. Yep. So that's what.
All right.
So Nate, you're diving.
That sounds made up.
You're but amazingly, it's not. So you're diving in to soteriology today, Nate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could have called the episode that.
We could have.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe still will.
Maybe we could.
Right. But probably won't.
Instead of my joke title.
Twice saved, always saved works for me.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, whatever. So we're getting some soteriology. All right. So we're going to start with Calvinism.
Okay.
And kind of just work our way through. And one of the things that we said last time, and this is going to hold true for this today, like we talked so much about Catholicism in the episodes about Catholics that we're not going to.
No kidding.
We're not going to dive into their perspective of soteriology. Okay.
Do they have a different one than these people?
Theirs are going to be more closely aligned with Arminianism.
Okay.
All right, but we'll get there.
Okay.
Okay. And so, all right. So in Calvinism, it's called Calvinism because it's got its roots back to John Calvin, but in no way or no shape or form is John Calvin, or would John Calvin have said, "Oh yeah, I'm the one who created this theological concept." Okay.
Oh.
So others will refer to it as Reformed theology. In other words, it came out from the Reformers, and so
in like the 1500s.
Yeah, in the 1500s with Martin Luther, and then following that, with Calvin, and often they will trace their roots back to early church fathers as well, and specifically Augustine. Okay.
Okay.
And so, but within Reformed theology or Calvinism, the idea of salvation is that because of God's sovereignty, which is another very important perspective for Reformed theology. It's like they have a very high view of the sovereignty of God. Okay. And so much so that there's such a high view of the sovereignty of God, and such a view like a view of man being so totally depraved that there is no possible way that God could, or that man could have chosen God, because the man is so totally depraved. And in God's sovereignty, in God's sovereignty, He chooses who will go to heaven and who will go to hell.
But isn't that the whole point, that we're like super depraved?
100%.
Like that's why Jesus came to save us in the first place.
And all the different camps we're going to look at are going to hold, most of them are going to hold to a total depravity perspective. Okay. And so
we're the worst.
I mean,
like we're the worst beings in the universe.
Well, it's not just that
because we choose to do evil, and well, demons do that too, I guess.
Right. Yeah, but all of the world is fallen, right? But you're right.
Right.
I mean, we are the ones who are consciously making a decision to.
But Jesus didn't save Satan or the demons, so they don't have any.
Right. He did
hope.
not. He did not save them.
You're given our options, we're the worst. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, all right. So in the early 1900s, this kind of theological acronym was created that went along with Reformed theology or Calvinism. It's called TULIP. Okay? And I know.
Huh?
I promise we're not just shifting to flowers at this point.
We're just making more stuff up.
No, we're really not. All right. And so tulip, so starting with a T is total depravity. Okay. So man's totally depraved. Okay. All right. Then there's the U, which is the unconditional election. Okay. So what this means is that God has chosen unconditionally. He's chosen who's going to heaven, who's going to hell. Okay. So in other words, because man is so totally depraved and cannot reach out to God, cannot be saved in any other means, God must save man himself by choosing who will be saved and who will not be saved.
This is too much.
Okay. So let me just run the whole acronym back that they all build on each other. So there's the L, which is the limited atonement. Okay. So in other words, Christ came and died for only the elect. So man's totally depraved. God elects or chooses who he wants to be with him. Okay.
And now Christ has saved them.
Now Christ comes and dies just for them. So not for everyone, but just for them. Okay.
If we're all depraved, why would God pick only some of us?
Because in his sovereignty, he deemed it so.
Okay.
All right. And then I is the irresistible grace. Okay. So in other words, that individuals cannot resist the grace of God. So if they've been elected, Christ has died.
The picked ones
right.
unable to resist.
Correct.
Okay.
So, because God has chosen them, elected them, right? God has died for them, or Jesus has come and died specifically for them, and therefore the grace that comes from that is specifically for them, and it cannot be rejected. Okay, it cannot be resisted.
Okay.
All right. And then there's the P, which is the perseverance of the saints, and some will say like the perseverance of God within the saints, but in other words, that they will be held, with an assurance of salvation, and so therefore God has chosen them. They are saved, and nothing could take them out of that point of salvation.
Okay, because it's so powerful, I just want to do it.
Yeah, or because God has deemed it so.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really the thing. So total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a time frame on when I'm supposed to get saved?
No. Not within this theological...
God could pick me right before I'm dead, according to this.
Yeah, and so, yes. And so the way that... And it depends on how... So that there's like a hyper form of Calvinism, okay? That would say that everything is orchestrated. That God has... not just salvation, but like every event in life. Like, you spilled coffee on your shirt.
God must have planned
that, right? So in that view, God does determine when you will be saved. He's got that.
So I can just blame God on all the stuff that I do.
Yeah, that'd be fair. People. That would be fair.
I couldn't help it because it was written.
Yeah, it was predestined.
I had to follow through.
Right.
Sorry.
Now, right. And so now there's a not so hyper perspective of Calvinism that holds to the fact that God predetermines or salvific issues, okay, but not necessarily like all of the day-to-day things, right? Like spilling coffee on your shirt, right? There's enough free will in that you spilled coffee on your shirt, okay.
So I know you're having fun with your free will and all that, but time to get saved,
right?
Okay.
And so, in other words, in that camp, you might have several opportunities to be saved. Now, eventually you will be saved, right? Because it's been predetermined for it to be so.
Right.
But there'll be like several opportunities where, in other words, you'll be hearing the gospel message, you respond to the gospel message at that point, right?
This seems like a bunch of people with like side eye toward everybody else.
What do you mean?
Like, did God pick you?
Oh, yeah.
Who in here's really picked? You know what I mean?
Right. And it can't, and like, and the honest question too is, am I really picked?
Right.
I mean, that's the whole thing.
Right. Well, that would,
I mean,
because if I can't free will myself into picking myself, then
Yeah, you're wholly trusting that God has chosen you.
Right.
Okay. Now, in light of that, because one of the questions comes, well, then why evangelize at all?
When does God write the list?
Right.
Was the list done before he created everything?
Yeah, and that's part of the like. There's actually like theological debates on this.
Okay.
Of, like, when did it actually occur?
Or is it like when I'm born, he just goes, nah.
No. Yeah. So really, the question is, did all of the choosing happen like prior to Adam and Eve,
right,
or after their fall? Okay.
Oh,
So, but if God knows, like he foreknows,
okay,
like he would know that they were going to fall. Therefore, he would predestine individuals before that. So there's some camps that would argue that all that occurred afterward. But I mean, like, it's not like God's making a decision about you while you're alive or at the time of birth or things like that. It would have been predetermined.
So this happened a long time ago.
Correct. And I'm using the word predetermined as well as not just predestined, because it is a determination. Like, God has determined it. And so, because a lot of times people get in, like, we'll read scriptures here in a second, like, where, like, even as someone who maybe doesn't believe, or like, for example, for me, I'm not a Reformed theology guy. I'm not a Calvinist. So I don't hold to it, but I do hold to predestination. Like, you have to. So the question is,
wait, what?
Yeah.
I have to what?
Well, like, we have to hold to some view of predestination because it's in Scripture.
Oh, because like Revelation.
Right. My argument is the predetermination aspect of it. That I think there's a difference between predestined and, like, predetermined. So, yeah. But, so for example,
because something could be destined, but I don't do all the things to get there, and so it doesn't happen.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11, this is, for example, why I think we all have to believe in a sense of predestination, just maybe not in the way that Calvinists would understand it. So in Ephesians 1, verse 11, in him we have also received an inheritance, because we were predestined according to the plan of the one who works out everything in agreement with the purpose of his will, so that we who had already put our hope in Christ might bring praise to his glory. And so again, there's an idea of that we were predestined according to the plan of the one of God who works out everything in agreement with the purpose of his will. So again, someone with a Reformed theology leaning would look at this verse and go, see, right there, it says we're predestined according to there's a plan that's been established by God, and he works out everything in agreement with the purpose of his will. In other words, his will is always accomplished.
Okay.
Therefore, that's the view of predestination. And for example, you would, like, another, like, pretty well-known verse is in Romans 8:29. For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. So once again, there's that idea of predestination, that he has predestined you to be conformed to the image of his Son. And I mean, and we could keep going.
So basically, God has predestined everybody to come to heaven, but we don't always follow through towards our destiny.
And that would be an argument. For example, an Arminian might make that argument. And we'll get into them in a minute.
Is this a smooth transition?
I mean, yeah, I think so. It's so because, like, so that's a Calvinist perspective, right? Of salvation. And that's why for Calvinists, like, you're not really worried about a once saved, always saved. It's more like, did God save you? Like, are you one of the elects?
So how do you find out?
That's it. Well, for a Calvinist, it's the idea of I have had this like spiritual awakening and enlightenment within. I don't mean that in any kind of pagan or New Age sense. I just mean like that, like we've our spiritual eyes have been opened. Okay.
Oh.
And we've been awakened to the realities.
So it's like a saved third eye.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like
the
sense of like, oh, I have a revelation. That's probably the best word to use, right? I've had a revelation of who Christ is.
A revelation, like all the predetermination stuff in that part,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay. And so, yeah. So,
Right?
So I've had a revelation of who Christ is, that he is, the Christ, the Son of the living God, and I am putting my faith in him. And so there's a sense of, I am putting my faith in him. I do know him. Therefore, I must be one of the elects because I have had this spiritual awakening.
I gotta be.
I've got to be.
I mean, I hope.
Right. So
Fingers crossed, but I gotta be.
I'm
definitely going to heaven.
Definitely.
I promise.
And so,
yes, I'm going.
And so on this, so when we talk about, like soteriology or like this theology of salvation, what we're like for a Calvinist, then it is only God's act that saves us.
So nothing I did.
Nothing you did.
I just had a revelation that I was saved.
Correct. But like you did nothing at all even within the salvific process.
Wait, so are any of them saved if they don't do the repeat after me thing?
Oh yeah, they're saved.
Okay.
They're saved.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because they had a revelation of who God is, and that was enough.
But don't they have to proclaim with their mouth or something
and believe in your heart?
Yeah.
The whole idea. Yeah, anyone who confesses with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that he rose from the dead.
So does that work? Does having a revelation that I'm saved mean I did those other things that you would say makes me saved?
No. So you would have, for example, like a Calvinist would say, because of revelation, I would confess.
Oh, okay.
And believe. All right.
I got you. Okay.
But the salvation happened not by anything that I did, not by a word I spoke, not by a prayer I prayed, not through any of those things, only by God's choosing.
So if the Calvinists don't believe that the prayer that they said and the believing that they do is how they get saved, do they get saved?
Yes. Like they'll have a response to the gospel message or those kind of things. But again, the response didn't save them, right?
It's their belief.
Because faith. Okay. And let me make sure I'm clear on this too. Because like Ephesians chapter 2, verse 9 says that by grace through faith, we are saved. Okay. Not by any, continues on, not by any works of our own, lest any man should boast. Okay. And so what they're saying is that faith is this gift that's been given to you. Right?
Okay.
So like you didn't even start believing in and of yourself.
A predetermined gift.
Yeah. So when God saves you, when you're justified by faith, which they'll say yes to that, but the faith is what God gave you as a gift.
Okay.
So you didn't manufacture faith, you didn't create faith, you weren't even cooperating, or not cooperating, but like there was no interaction there's nothing you did to be saved. It was fully revelation, faith given by God to you through his irresistible grace. Now you're saved.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So that's Calvinism.
All right. Good. Great.
All right. So people refer to Calvinists as like a 5-point Calvinist, right? In other words, you believe in the T, the U, the L, the I, the P, right? 5-point Calvinist. All right.
Is tulip a thing?
Yeah.
Or is it just do they have tulips in their church or whatever?
Oh, like actual, no.
Do they put a tulip on their gravestones?
Maybe.
I would.
I know you would.
I mean, I'd have someone else do it.
Right. Well, because you obviously...
Or I'd do it.
If it was predetermined to be so. All right. Anyway. But so that's all right. So that's one camp. Now, there is another camp that holds to...
I got to ask you the question.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.